Okay, we just reconvene the meeting at 4:05 and the General Manager will just give an update of what actually occurred.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and apologies and appreciate the patience. The platform that we use, it was a system-wide issue. It wasn't just a Wingecarribee issue, and it just chose that moment in time to seize up. So I do apologise for that, and we're back on track. So thank you.
Thank you. Item 8.1, the Southern Highlands Innovation Park Master Plan, General Manager.
Thank you, Mr. May. The Exec Manager Strategic Outcomes, Mr. Park, will speak to this item. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, General Manager. So, Mr. May, this report relates to the tender assessment for the preparation of a detailed master plan and governance framework for the Southern Highlands Innovation Park. So, Mr. May, the Southern Highlands Innovation Park is the largest employment precinct south of the Western Sydney Aerotropolis and is potentially a region-shaping precinct. However, despite, being identified as an employment precinct for a number of decades, the site remains largely unplanned and undeveloped. And Mr. May, as you'd be aware, Council has committed to developing a detailed master plan and servicing strategy for the precinct to assist in unlocking the potential of what is a regionally significant employment precinct. Council recently secured grant funding from the Department of Regional New South Wales to prepare a detailed master planning and governance framework for the SHIP. And in May of this year, Council went out to tender to prepare that work. Mr. May, a total of 8 tender responses were received. It was an extremely competitive process, and following that assessment of the tenders, it's recommended that Council accept the tender from Architectus Australia to prepare the master plan and governance framework for the SHIP.
This land's been rezoned for a couple of decades, hasn't it?
Mr. May, it was initially identified through an overlay in the Council's LEP in its 1980-something LEP, sorry, a long time before my time, and then formally rezoned in 2010, but identified as an employment precinct since the 80s.
Yeah. The item 8.4, the plastic recycling facility, the Council would not now have that problem. It's a community problem, not just a council problem. If the work that's happening now in relation to the master planning of the site for uses, if that had been undertaken previously, in other words, if the council had done its job properly earlier, we wouldn't have that problem?
Mr. May,
if you think it's an unfair question...
No, look, I don't think it's an unfair question. I think that could an applicant lodge an application for a development that's permissible in a zone? Yes. Would we have a lot stronger basis to support our argument, to support or otherwise a development of that nature? Definitely. I mean, a master plan and then the flow-on amendments to the planning framework are really critical to provide a strong evidence base for the types of development we want to see in a precinct like that, and hold a lot of weight with whether it's the state government or council assessing an application, in this case the state government, but hold a lot of weight in the assessment of an application of this nature.
Because this land is an exciting opportunity, not only for the Shire, but for the region more generally, sitting on the corridor, the Canberra corridor, and being so close to the Illawarra.
I'm glad you're excited, because I'm excited.
Well, I think it's about time it happened. Okay, so in relation to item 8.1, I'd move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 8 of the business paper 1, 2 and 3 and declare that carried. Next item is 8.2, the Community Heritage Study. General Manager.
Thank you, Mr. May, and back to Mr. Park. Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager. Mr. May, the purpose of this report is to present the Wingecarribee Community-Based Heritage Study to Council and to seek endorsement to undertake, landowner consultation initially and then broader community consultation on the draft study. So by way of background, there have been a number of heritage studies undertaken in the Shire over the years, and in 2012, the Council of the Day resolved to defer some 251 items that were recommended to be heritage listed, and that list of recommended items has been kept confidential since, despite being identified in a council-led study. And this has resulted in, I guess, a reactive approach to heritage management throughout the Shire through the use of things like interim heritage orders and the like, which I guess is not an appropriate approach to heritage management, either for the community or for the development industry. And in 2020, I guess these issues finally came to a head, and it was resolved by Council to bring forward a report to progress the deferred study and items that were recommended in 2012. To progress a study of this nature, though, involves a significant body of work, and in September of 2020, a community project team of local heritage professionals and experts was established, and after, I guess, countless volunteer hours, the project team presented Council with what is now known as the Wingecarribee Community Heritage Study. And Mr May, this report seeks Council endorsement to progress the study and to commence consultation with landowners initially, as I said, before undertaking broader consultation with the community. And as part of that consultation process, I guess we'll be asking landowners to provide any information that they have that would either support or otherwise the heritage listing of their properties. We'll also be undertaking an independent peer review of the study following the exhibition period, I guess to further support the recommendations that will come back to Council. And Mr May, I guess it's important to note that this is not a planning proposal that is seeking to list heritage items. It's a community-based heritage study. And our intention is very much to consult broadly with landowners and with the community so that we can make informed decisions about what should and shouldn't be listed as heritage items under the Wingecarribee LEP. And just very quickly, I'd really like to acknowledge the countless hours and the commitment that was put into this project from the project team. It's been a massive effort from everyone involved and will hopefully lead to better heritage management practices in the Shire into the future. And I guess similarly with my team, who have put in a lot of effort, initially assisting with the project group, but also in getting this project to a stage where we can commence consultation with the community and landowners.
So, in effect, this at this stage is a community-led way of developing a heritage plan for the Shire.
Yes, it was very much a community-led study, and based on, I mean, formerly the Office of Environment and Heritage have a framework for community-based heritage studies, and it was developed along those lines. Largely by volunteer hours from our community.
Look, like everybody else, I commend the volunteers who have become involved in this. There's obviously I haven't read every word, I've got to say, it's very thick, but there's countless hours in it. But I would just emphasise that this is at this stage a community-based heritage study. As I understand it, we will now go to consultation with those landowners. The council staff will then become involved in the review. It will go to a peer review and then to the panel, which also has heritage assistance, before it comes back to council. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. And on the back of the study, what will then occur is a recommended list of heritage items based on everything you just said, and initially the feedback we received from the landowners, the internal review by staff and the peer review that's being undertaken, and on the back of that there'll be a recommendation and a planning proposal to actually list a number of items in the Wingecarribee LEP. So there'll be another consultation process as part of that planning proposal as well.
The peer review, the way I read the initial report was that it would occur after the staff had a look, but what the panel is suggesting, it happened concurrently. Is that right?
Mr. May, the peer review, I mean, you've seen the document. It's, I mean, there's a lot of information there. So it's a big project. So what the panel advised was kick that process off sooner rather than later, so that it doesn't hold up the progression of the study at the end.
Yeah. Look, I can't overemphasise the importance of such a study to a community generally, and I think everybody concerned is to be commended. But there's a long, long way to go with this. What would your timeline when do you think it will eventually get back to council for a determination?
I'm actually planning on taking 6 months leave. No. Look, good question. Look, I'll have to take it on notice and get back to you.
Fair
Mate.
Okay, in relation to item 8.2, I'd move the officer's recommendation 1 and 2 and declare that carried. Next item is 8.3, Woolworths Moss Vale, voluntary planning agreement.
Thank you, Mr. May, and Mr. Park again.
Thank you. Mr. May, the purpose of this report is to inform Council and the community of a proposed neighbourhood shopping centre development on land at 233 Argyle Street in Moss Vale, and to advise Council of an offer to enter into a voluntary planning agreement to facilitate a new road access to the development over what is Council-owned land. So, Mr. May, the land at 233 Argyle Street was recently sold through an EOI process, and the new owner, so being Fabcot, is proposing to develop the site for a full-scale supermarket and a number of specialty stores. So Fabcot are proposing as part of that development to provide access to the site through council-owned land at 231 Argyle Street in Moss Vale, and has made an offer to enter into a VPA to pay a monetary contribution to provide permanent access to the site. So Fabcot has also requested that the council provide landowners' consent for the purpose of lodging the DA. And can I stress, Mr. May, that providing landowners' consent in no way, I guess, fetters council's assessment of the development application process. They are two separate processes, and providing landowners' consent doesn't provide any support or otherwise for the development as proposed. Mr. May, the matter was reported to the June council meeting and ultimately deferred, and the report before you recommends that the General Manager be provided authorisation to enter into negotiations in relation to Fabcot's offer to enter into the VPA, and that the matter be reported back to council following the negotiations, and also that the General Manager provide landowners' consent to Fabcot for the purpose of lodging a development application over council-owned land. Again, can I stress that it doesn't relate to the assessment of the application, it is just providing consent for the applicant to lodge the development application.
Would any VPA, if agreed, go to the panel on the way through? The only reason why I ask the question is that if that was to occur, you'll have to make sure that the panel is made up of different people, because I think at the end of the day, the panel will deal with the DA for Woolworths, won't it?
Depending on the value of the development, I mean, my best guess is it will be determined by the local planning panel, the development application. A voluntary planning agreement doesn't need to go through the local planning panel. The planning panel only need to provide advice in accordance with the regulations around planning proposals and determinations on certain development applications. Council can ask the panel to provide advice on any other planning matter. So we could ask the panel to provide advice in relation to the voluntary planning agreement, but it certainly doesn't need to.
I think it would be a good precedent to put it through the panel for the future, if there's going to be a planning agreement. But in saying that, the panel, and there's obviously panels are set up by the state government to cover such contingencies, would have to be a different one. But you know, if there is agreement between the staff and the developer, I just think it needs to come back through the panel before it comes to council.
Mr. May, if I can just add to Mr. Parks, so we will be bringing forward in the next 2 to 3 months a revised voluntary planning agreement policy, and excuse me, and that would be an ideal time to incorporate that. So we'll take that on board. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Having said that, and noting that this only gives land owners consent, that's simple as that, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 24 of the business paper 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 and declare that carried. Next item is 8.4, the Plaza Refine.
Thank you, Mr. May. I'd just like to table correspondence that was received from Nancy Zen, who's the Director of Plaza Refine. and she had asked that it be considered as part of the public forum, excuse my voice, but I'd like to table that letter and have that made public on Council's website. Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager. Mr May, so this report relates to the proposed Moss Vale plastics recycling facility that's currently being assessed as a state significant development application. Mr May, as you would be aware, Council's previously made a submission on the proposed development and raised a number of really critical concerns about the proposal. And as part of our submission, we called for a social impact assessment to be prepared in support of the development application. Mr May, as part of that process, the applicant has now submitted their formal, what's known as a response to submissions, which included a number of changes to the proposal, as well as a social impact assessment was provided as part of that response to submission. Council staff have undertaken a review of that response to submissions, including the social impact assessment, and have a number of real concerns about the way the social impact assessment was developed. We called for the social impact assessment to be prepared because we had concerns about the engagement process that was undertaken to inform the development application, and we specifically sought independent consultation to be undertaken to inform the social impact assessment. And we asked that the social impact assessment be prepared, knowing that it could lead to significant changes to the proposal. Firstly, I'd say that no further consultation was undertaken with the community as part of developing the social impact assessment, and that we have real concerns that the social impact assessment essentially has been retrofitted to fit the existing development proposal rather than potentially leading to significant changes. It's also worth noting, as part of the response to submissions, the applicant has proposed a new transport haulage route, so to bring waste to and from the site down through an established residential area and past an existing school. And Council have significant concerns about the proposed haulage route. Council have an adopted transport plan for what's known as the Southern Highlands Innovation Park, and that transport plan was put in place for really good reasons, so that we could manage the impacts of that development within the industrial zoned land, and so that trucks weren't coming down through residential areas past schools. So the proposed haulage route directly conflicts with Council's established planning framework for that area. It's also worth noting that Council previously considered an offer to enter into a voluntary planning agreement from the proponent, which would commit Council to using its powers of compulsory acquisition to facilitate access to and from the site. Previously, Council resolved that it wasn't in a position to properly assess the offer to enter into a VPA until the social impact assessment had been prepared. It is timely that that matter get brought back to Council. You'll note in the report that the staff are recommending that firstly we write to the Department of Planning expressing our concerns with the applicant's response to submissions, and particularly in relation to the adequacy of the social impact assessment, as well as that proposed new haulage route. We're also seeking to restate our concerns because we don't feel they've been appropriately addressed, particularly in relation to the suitability of the site for the proposed development, the inconsistency with the planning framework. I mean, the issue you raised earlier around the impact it will have on the work we're doing in relation to the Southern Highlands Innovation Park, as well as some of the critical infrastructure limitations in and around Moss Vale. Further, the report recommends that we advise the applicant that we're still not in a position to accept the offer to enter into a VPA at this stage. Firstly, because it's considered premature until we have a proper understanding of what the final development proposal will be. There's undertaking a review of the whole development as we speak, and until we know what the development is, it's really hard for us to commit to enter into a VPA. But also, we have not satisfied that the offer to enter into a VPA adequately addresses or demonstrates how the offer represents a material public benefit. And that is one of the critical tests for Council to enter into a VPA.
Look, I think you and your staff are representing this community very well in this matter. Anyhow, look, in relation to item 8.4, the Moss Vale plastic recycling facility update, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 29 of the business paper. Before I do that, was there anything in Ms Zhang's letter, which I've read, which would influence you changing your decision, recommendation?
No.
Thank you. In relation to 8.4, the Mossvale Plastic Recycling Facility Update, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 29 of the business paper, 1, 2, 3 and 4, and declare that carried. 9.1, General Manager, Development Assessment Performance.
Thank you, Mr. May. The Acting Manager Development Assessment and Regulation, Mr. McFadden, is making his way to the microphone, and he will introduce and speak to this item, and the Director may wish to add following his introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager. Mr. May, it's with great pleasure that I commend the team on a significant improvement following the Council resolution of the 15th of February 2023 in relation to the Development Assessment for Performance, and I would like to commend the team for pulling together and being able to produce the result that we have today. We do have a great team, and I'd like to acknowledge that we've listened to the community feedback, and also I'd like to actually thank the community for being patient while there's been significant change going on in the assessment team for that matter. As for the actual numbers, the goal set by the Council resolution was for an average time frame of 100 days. We have achieved 125 days, bearing in mind that the low point was at 171 days in October 2022. Overall, the total number of applications under assessment has also fallen from 352 in January of this year down to 312. And importantly, the total number of applications over 100 days has also fallen from 189 in January 2023 down to 133 as at the 30th of June 2023. So what is interesting is that the overall number of refusals since the 15th of February has increased. We've had 26 refusals compared to, say, 6 in the period from the 1st of July up until the 15th of February. And yet that has not resulted in an immediate increase in the number of appeals, most likely because there's less deemed refusals in that people know, applicants know what the issues are, and they're able to lodge a fresh application as opposed to proceeding to the New South Wales Land and Environment Court. Importantly, also, it's relevant to note that the number of clearances has reduced. We unfortunately reached a period of 100 days over the Christmas New Year period, which was unacceptable. I'm pleased to note that it now is down to 14 days, and we are striving for a 7-day turnaround. So there's a number of things to note here, Mr. May, including the fact that these particular numbers are not static, so we don't have the luxury of simply freezing things or freezing a moment in time. For example, there's a constant number of applications coming in, even though we are clearing a backlog. And I think that the report that's presented to Council today very clearly indicates that we have achieved a trend in that the number of applications being determined exceeds the number of applications being lodged. And I think that's actually quite a relevant point. And I might also add that the average that's been achieved as at the 30th of June 2023 is marginally higher than the state average, which is published on the New South Wales Planning Performance Dashboard, which is 112 days. All in all, I'd just like to clarify, just to ensure that there's no ambiguity with respect to the numbers. It's very, very important that we actually compare apples with apples. And on that note, the New South Wales Department of Planning and Environment local development performance monitoring statistics include development applications, Section 4.55 modifications and CDCs. So in order to compare things equally, that's what's included in the numbers. So there can be, for example, reports that are run on development applications and they may not necessarily run those other categories, and I think it's important that we actually have an equal playing field there. So there's a number of other factors which are of note, including the number of applications withdrawn. In the period from the 15th of February 2023 to the 30th of June 2023, we had 10 applications withdrawn. And the reason why this is relevant is often there'll be a lot of work involved in having the application written up. It might be for refusal, and naturally Any request for withdrawal which is received via the New South Wales Planning Portal needs to be honoured, and of course there can be a lot of work in those withdrawals. So when combined with the number of determinations, there's been quite a bit of work going on there. There's also recognition of the council resolution containing a second component, which is to achieve a 60-day average by the end of 2023. And I've set out in this report a strategy which we are putting into place in order to achieve that, that being the fast-track coordination team, and the idea being there to look at applications that can be expedited, for example, that are of low environmental impact, fully compliant and able to be the subject of a fast-track assessment, thereby reducing the timeframes. Now, there's much to be done, and we are certainly not being complacent given the current environment, even though there is a downward trend in terms of application lodgements. I think the total number of applications under assessment has reduced, which is encouraging. And importantly, I commend the staff on the approach that's been taken, because it's a conservative approach rather than simply looking at numbers and presenting numbers in a very convenient fashion. We've taken a much harder approach, and that is to clear a lot of the applications that are much older out of the system. That has, of course, the added benefit of improving customer service and moving some of those older applications on. So it's much more difficult, it has been much more difficult to deal with the older applications to get them out, and we are continuing that to the point where that will bring down the numbers. So overall, a significant improvement, and we are quite grateful to be able to continue on with that. And as I said, I commend the team for pulling together in order to achieve that result with the available resources. So, thank you.
The council's currently defending 9 appeals in the Land and Environment Court. Do any of those appeals relate to determinations of the panel when the panel has agreed with the council staff or made their own determination on refusal?
Mr. Mayor, I'd have to take that question on notice and come back to you in order to give you an accurate answer.
Thanks. The other question I have is, I note, and which I totally endorse and I think is a fantastic result or a fantastic initiative, is one chance to amend your application and 7 days to do it. That gets rid of, in my view, this perception about consultants. And that's been strictly enforced?
Indeed it is, Mr. Mayor, and I think you'll find that it provides a degree of certainty to both applicants, staff and the community providing submissions, because ultimately you'll find that a request for information will set out ultimately the concerns that council has with an application and provide that opportunity to withdraw the application ahead of any determination. Naturally, where the response is unsatisfactory or where there's no response at all, we will proceed with a determination, and naturally that brings it to a head. So that has assisted in reducing the time.
I think it should be in part of the New South Wales planning process, in my view. Now, the other question I have is, how do applicants know that they're going to get refused to give them the... So I saw there was one on the panel, which is the only public information I get to see about DAs, where an applicant withdrew when they, I assume, when they saw that the was a refusal. I would hope that they didn't get any of their DA fees back, but that's another issue. That's nothing to do with me. But I would think if it gets to the panel stage, there's been a lot of work in it. But how these further 10 applications were withdrawn, do they relate to they just can't comply with the one chance in 7 days, or they've run their run?
Mr. Mayor, a number of reasons contribute to applications being withdrawn. Some of those include, for example, the inability to provide appropriate development that's consistent with the objects of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979, compliance with Council's Development Control Plan or Local Environmental Plan. Other factors, for example, if there's a biodiversity assessment report required, often that can't be done in the wintertime, and we certainly cannot hold applications in abeyance. And if flora and fauna, for example, needs to be assessed during the spring or the summer period, it's best that that application be resubmitted once that type of ecological assessment is undertaken. So there's a number of reasons, but ultimately you'll find that in answer to your question, people know that an application is generally going to be refused because they're set out those reasons are set out in the request for information letter. And as part of that letter, we've adopted a process whereby we do provide generally a longer period if we are satisfied that the information can be addressed, or if we are convinced that the applicant is unlikely or unable to address the issues, it's a 7-day letter.
Look, I think this is a very good result. I must say that I never thought that 100 days would be achievable, but we had to put a target there to send a message. But you're getting very close to the state average, and I'm pretty confident by Christmas you'll be bettering it. So well done to you and your team. In relation to item 9.1, development assessment performance, I'd move recommendations 1 and 2 as outlined on page 36 of the business paper and declare that carried. 9.2, open access to information in relation to development applications. General Manager.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. May. Before I hand over to Mr. Davis, I should say and acknowledge Mr. Davis joined us in September 2022 and Mr. McFadden's been with us just a little bit longer, and it's their work that with the team that we've achieved the results we have. The open access information in relation to DAs, again, has been a cross-organisational approach, and it's about supporting a commitment to good governance and transparency in information. I'll ask the Director, Mr. Davis, to speak briefly to this item. Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager. Mr. May, this report provides advice and information for consideration in relation to Council forming a position on the level of information to be proactively released via the DA tracker on Council's website. The report has been informed by legal advice received in relation to the level of to any level of risk, and takes into account, of course, our obligations under the Government Information the GIPA Act, the Privacy Act and Copyright Act. The recommendation of this report is that Council implement the following low risk enhancements as detailed in the table titled Overview of Documents to be made available on eTrack system in this report for the following event stages: development application lodgement documentation, consultation documentation, external authority referrals, final internal referrals, applicant and owner correspondence, assessment documentation, planning panel documentation, and DA determination documentation.
Look, I can't overemphasise my commitment to this community in relation to openness and transparency in the DA assessments. This is not a negative reference to the staff, but I can see no reason why internal referrals and internal emails aren't listed, even if they're locked. In addition, I am told an enormous amount of time is spent on the phone dealing with objectors and applicants, and I just think it's important that the community is able to see not the content of the conversation, but who's making the inquiries, etc. So I'm not going to adopt this recommendation. I think it goes a long way, but I want to go further. I want one source of truth in DA determinations, so a resident can look from home, and even if we break new ground in local government in relation to this, I'm pretty determined. So I'm going to move that the matter be deferred to allow direct input from the Administrator, and the Administrator be authorised in consultation with the General Manager to obtain third-party assistance in accordance with the Council's procurement policies, and declare that carried. Next item is charges and fees update.
Thank you, Mr. May. To Mr. Conrad, the Acting Chief Financial Officer. Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager. Council adopted the 2023-24 Resourcing Strategy Delivery Programme and Operational Plan, including the budget and fees and charges at the extraordinary meeting of Council on 28th June 2023. This report presents some amendments to the 23-24 fees and charges, and the proposed amendments include the notice of payment fee to be removed, the building information certificate fee, which was $16,000, to be corrected to the $1,600 that was intended to be, the Tulips After Dark fee to be split between adult and youth concession holders, and the Art Studio Trail fee to be amended, as well as the hall hire cleaning fee, where the latter two amendments are proposed to bring the fees in line with the general inflation index of approximately 7%. These amendments are to be publicly exhibited for 28 days and a report presented back to Council should any responses be received. Council officers identified an administrative error in the operational plan in the priority actions for the waste services and community engagement principal activities. The priority actions were duplications of the waste operations and governance priority actions respectively. The report outlines the correct priority actions for Council to note. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Look, thank you very much for that. In relation to item 9.3, I'd move the officer's recommendation 1 and 2 as outlined on page 72 of the business paper. 9.5, Gladstone Road Barrel tender for water main renewal. General Manager.
Thank you, Mr. May. Mr. Mellor, the Manager Water Services, will introduce this item. Thanks.
Thank you, General Manager. Mr. May. The purpose of the report is to present the results of the tender for the water main renewal along Gladstone Road in Bowral. Residents along Gladstone Road in Bowral have experienced minimum levels of service with regards to pressure in the water supply due to their location in an elevated position on Mount Gibraltar. The project was successfully delivered to improve the situation and pressures were increased. Subsequently, the old asbestos cement water main suffered with repeated failures and the main was proposed for renewal. As such, the renewal of 733 metres of 150mm diameter asbestos cement water main as a lift and relay process was put to market as a request for tender. This included some drainage works to mitigate potential damage to the roadway surface that could be caused by groundwater movement along the new trench, given some steep gradients along that route. 11 tenders were received, ranging from $317,000 to $1.4 million, with 3 non-conforming submissions. The evaluation process clearly determined J Group Corporation as the lowest priced conforming preferred contractor. The recommendation of this report is that the Council accepts the tender from J Group Corporation for the water main renewal along Gladstone Road at a lump sum price of $326,725.30, inclusive of GST. Thank you, Mr. May.
So you're amending the officer's recommendation to include the name of the successful tenderer?
Correct.
In relation to item 9.5, Gladstone Road Barrel, I'd move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 84 of the business paper, 1, 2 and 3, but including in item 1 the name J Holdings Group Proprietary Limited. Declare that carried. Next item is 9.6, Old South Road.
Thank you. Mr. Tripkovic, Manager Project Delivery. Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager. Mr. May, the purpose of this report is to seek approval to proceed with an additional stage of works, referred to as Stage 3, to rehabilitate the last remaining section of Old South Road. Old South Road is a local distributor road connecting northern localities of the Shire to Bowral and has become a heavily used bypass of Mittagong and Bowral town centres. The road has never been constructed to a standard to cater to such high volumes of traffic and has therefore suffered from extreme usage and insufficient drainage over the years, which has imposed significant effort onto Council to maintain. In October of 2022, Stefanuti Constructions were awarded the tender to rehabilitate the 9.6 kilometres of road between Merrigang Street and Bowral to Almerton Road in Mittagong. Works on Stage 2 are from Range Road to Almerton Road in Mittagong and commenced in January of 23, and Stage 1 works from Merrigang Street in Bowral to Range Road commenced in May 23. Whilst there have been several unfavourable site conditions, such as locating unmapped Gemina gas mains and geotechnical conditions being far worse than original investigations prescribed, works are proceeding well and are still currently on track for completion in November 2023, weather permitting. A further section of Old South Road has been identified as requiring rehabilitation. Whilst not as dilapidated as Stage 1 and Stage 2 sections, it does present ongoing maintenance concerns. Following a favourable tender result for Stage 1 and 2, Council seeks to rehabilitate the last remaining section of Old South Road, being a 1.3 kilometre stretch of road north of Almerton Road, which will bring the entire length of Old South Road up to current standards of safety and drivability. Work has commenced on documenting the design for Stage 3, and this report seeks the approval to proceed with obtaining costs from Stefanuti Constructions to undertake the works. Numerous advantages are realised by leveraging off the incumbent contractor, which include familiarity with the design parameters and ground conditions, streamlined procurement requirements, and relieving the need for fresh site establishment costs if a new contractor was to be appointed. Council will also validate costing in line with schedule of rates provided during the original tender process. In reference to Council's currently adopted budget position for the project, there are sufficient funds to complete the works based off the initial estimates and schedules of rates. Following completion of design and procurement processes, works on Stage 3 are proposed to commence concurrently with Stage 1 sub-pavement works, which will be ending in the coming months, and is anticipated that the works on Stage 3 will be completed by April or May of 2024. This will be further refined and likely expedited once the contractor can gauge the scope and program the works into their current work plans. In closing, this report requests the resolution to proceed with Stage 3 works within the current adopted budget for Old South Road rehabilitation and complete the rehabilitation and safety improvements for the final link of the heavily used 15-kilometre stretch of Old South Road.
So are you saying, look, I totally support this. I think it's very good, but you said April 24. The whole of Old South Road won't be closed till then. You will open stages 1 and 2 to Almerton?
That's correct, Mr. May. Stage 1 and 2 are still proposed to be finished by end of November of this year.
Look, yesterday at the function for Station Street, a gentleman spoke to me who had to go to Mittagong Airport and said he just could not believe the work that's going on out there. And I think the more publicity we can give this, the better. This will make a quantum difference, in my view, to traffic in Bowral and Mittagong town centres. And I think everybody on the team is to be congratulated for this. Anyhow, in relation to item 9.6, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 89, 1, 2 and 3 and declare that carried. And, General Manager, I'd hope that if there is an agreement in relation to the last bit, a report comes back to Council or there's some public advice to the community that, to close the loop, yeah. So, 9.7, the Rotary Peace Pole.
We go from major road constructions to rotary peace poles to Mr. Tripkovic, Manager Project Delivery. Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager, and yes, our scope is quite diverse. Mr. May, the purpose of this report is to provide an update of the consultation undertaken with the Rotary District 9705 in relation to the installation of a peace pole. In 2022, Ms. Rob Yule from the Rotary District of 9705 made a request to have a peace pole installed within the Wingecarribee Shire. Peace poles are a monument that originated in Japan in 1955 to promote peace in the world in the wake of World War II. With the first peace pole being installed outside of Japan in 1983, there are now over 200,000 around the world. The peace pole movement is well aligned with Rotary's area of focus of promoting peace through their service to society. The words "May peace prevail on earth" is a prevalent message on the pole that typically stands 1.8 to 2.4 metres tall, and the message can be inscribed in numerous languages. Council recommends that our local Indigenous language is recognised and included on the pole. The chosen location on the Kirkham Street site of the Civic Centre will allow for public viewing and gathering, reflection and ceremonies such as the International Day of Peace on 21st September annually. Rotary will manufacture and provide the peace pole for council to install at the nominated location in preparation for the official unveiling requested on the 25th of October 2024, where it is proposed to have council, Indigenous and Rotary leaders in attendance. Thank you.
Thanks for this, and thank you for coming up with this site. I thought some of the other sites, when they were talking to me originally, were inappropriate. I think my views on names on plaques generally are pretty well known. So I'm happy with this recommendation, but adding a number 3, request that the names of individuals do not appear on the Rotary Peace Pole. I don't see what that adds to the pole. The same as mayors and councillors' names splashed everywhere as well. So in relation to item 9.7, I'd move the officer's recommendation 1 and 2 and add a 3, request that the names of individuals do not appear on the Rotary Peace Pole, and declare that carried. Item 9.8, Australia Day.
Yep, thank you, Mr. May. Ms. Foster, the Director of Corporate Strategy and Resourcing, will speak to this item. Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager. Mr. May, the Australia Day post-project review was undertaken to understand the community's response to the Australia Day activities held in Berrima in 2023 to plan for the 2024 event. For 25 years, Australia Day has held an annual event at Berrima comprising a citizenship ceremony, market stalls and entertainment and a parade. This year, a citizenship ceremony was held in a marquee on the grounds of the Berrima Courthouse that welcomed 65 new citizens, with market stalls on Argyle Street, including a couple with council, where staff were able to interact, engage and chat with the community. Several venues provided live music. The stalls and local businesses were pleased with the attendance on the day. The community survey indicated areas for improvement, which will be taken into consideration when planning the 2024 event. Due to the identification of parts of Berrima Village being bushfire-prone land, a considerable area of the Berrima Village requires a DA to hold an event. Based on the feedback from the 2023 Australia Day event survey, it's proposed to apply for a development application to enable the parade and other activities, including market stalls, to be held across the wider village for Australia Day in 2024. It is also proposed to hold the Australia Day citizenship ceremony in Berrima as it was this year.
I was amazed by the cost of the tent. And that's just a reality of life, is it?
Yes, Mr. May, that there were quotes obtained, and due to the size of the marquee and the amount of labour to actually erect and take down, it is a considerable cost.
Like Christmas trees. Anyhow, but I'm going to pass comment. Okay, in relation to 9.8, I think it's important to note that the staff has listened to what the community generally was saying, as well as Berrima. I'd move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 96 of the business paper, 1, 2, 3, but at a number 4, a further report be brought to council outlining plans for Australia Day 2023. 24 celebrations. Yeah, my apologies. Declare that carried. 9.9, Festival of Lights.
Thank you, Mr. May, and Mr. Kloppers, Manager Business and Property, will briefly introduce this item. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. May, colleagues and members of the community. The item today is to seek Council's approval to provide the Festival of Lights with a donation to waive fees and charges associated with the hire of the senior sits room at Corbett Gardens to conduct Festival of Light activities up to the amount specified in the item, as well as to provide exclusive use of Corbett Gardens for the ticketed events of Festival of Lights and the Food and Wine event, And lastly, the suspension of the alcohol-free zone and the timings around that, amongst others. Mr. Mayor, I'll take the report as read, safe to note that by making the concessions and the contributions requested will assist members of the community to activate some important spaces that the community has, and to broaden the festival's reach. The council would like to publicly exhibit the fee waiver under Section 356 of the Local Government Act, and the donation to be publicly exhibited under 610F of the Local Government Act. I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, I think the community owes a huge debt of gratitude to the people who organised the Festival of Lights, and the fact now that the Wine and Food Festival is going to be incorporated, and Santa's Grotto, and the more that people get to know about this, I think the better. I would like to potentially give them more funding on the basis that they can do more, because I'm told they can, but they just don't have the money. But it's just not open slather. So I'm going to add a number 5, or between 4 and 6. I'm going to add council approve an additional 10,000 in funding, subject to the general manager approving additional activities being incorporated into the Festival of Lights that provide a broader community benefit. They've been talking about what they could do. This will provide the money for that broader community benefit, providing the staff is happy that it complies with the spirit of Christmas and everything we're trying to achieve. And also I'm told, due to a technicality, we just need to have a look under the 7,000 under Section 610F of the Local Government Act, and a contribution of 25,000. Yeah, as on number 6, which has been a technical thing, was brought to my attention that needed correcting. So in relation to item 9.9, I'd move the officer's recommendation, adding a new number 5 and pushing the numbers down to 7, and incorporating those technical matters under the Local Government Act, and declare that carried. Next item is the benefits of concrete versus asphalt in road construction.
Thank you, Mr. May. Before Mr. Robinson introduces this item, I wish to table an email from EVA, the Exeter Village Association, expressing concern about the use of concrete within Exeter and the implications that they see for the heritage, nature or character of Exeter. So Mr. Robinson, over to you.
Thank you, General Manager. Mr. May, the purpose of this report is to provide a comparison of asphalt and concrete footpaths, the outcome of which was found that concrete footpaths are of superior resilience as well as cost effectiveness, and so it is recommended that council continues to provide concrete footpaths in most situations across the Shire. I think it is important to note that, as mentioned by Eva, there are some instances within the Shire where, given the heritage significance and character, that concrete might not be appropriate. However, the purpose of this report was more as a broad-scale comparison of concrete considered against asphalt.
I would think if Berrima had cottoned onto this, they would have written a similar letter in relation to Exeter. But look, it's my recollection that this matter flowed from a resident asking during the budget process, could we have a look at that? And we undertook to do that. That's right, isn't it? Correct. Yeah. Okay. In relation to item 9.10, I would move the officer's recommendation 1 and 2 as outlined on page 121 of the business paper, and declare that carried. The independent review of Commonwealth disaster funding.
Thank you, Mr. May. Mr. Davis, Director Communities and Place, will speak to this item. Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager. Mr. May, in February this year, the Australian Government commissioned an independent review of the Commonwealth disaster funding arrangements. The review is considering and making recommendations on how government invests in disaster risk reduction, preparedness, response, recovery and resilience that can better support a national system. The review was planned to take approximately 18 months, and so we're well into that now. And a final report is expected to be provided to the government in April next year. The review invited members of the public and in particular councils as well, who've based on their experiences, to provide comments, and there were 5 key questions asked. The officers at Wingecarribee Shire Council have submitted responses as outlined in the report. The submission responded to the 5 questions by advising of our experience with recent flood disaster events, supporting emphasis on mitigation and prevention, identifying council's experience of the complex process between state and federal government, and recommending that the processes be made administratively simpler, suggesting that a level of practical betterment be made possible when infrastructure is reinstated. It is recommended that council note the submission made to the review.
Thank you. I'm happy to endorse rather than just note the submission, but I'd like a copy of it forwarded to all members of Parliament representing this Shire, the local government New South Wales, the Australian Local Government Association and the Canberra Regional Joint Organisation, and declare that carried. Next item is 9.12, Investments Report. There's no introduction. I would move the recommendation as outlined on page 134 of the business paper and declare that carried. The Audit, Risk and Improvement meeting. I note there's no introduction, but I've got a couple of questions. So who do they go to?
To the Manager Governance and Corporate Reporting.
Okay. Look, I noted that the Audit Committee is talking about a rainy day money. I had it marked. Here it is. A rainy day money of 10 million, which is clearly, in my view, totally unrealistic. You know, I've asked for a report to come to council on a policy, but does anyone have a view on it, or?
Through you, Mr. May, there is a there was a comment around it, but the majority of ARIC and the acting CFO have said that the $5 million is adequate. The issue, it doesn't impact on council's ratios, but that would mean that we'd have to have an extra $5 million in an on-call account, which then restricts the revenue that we can actually make off that $5 million. So restricting another $5 million into an on-call account is probably not financially prudent.
I think the 5 million needs to be reviewed. I don't necessarily agree that that's at this stage. That was what it was by virtue of the Finch report I think I had done when I first arrived, because in my view they were tricky, the former council, how they managed. Everything seemed to balance off. There was no ups and downs. But it would substantially affect the ratio relating to cash, which it will probably make it one of the highest in the state.
Mr. May, if I can, rather than speculate, if I could ask the acting CFO to make a comment on.
So you're all obviously aware that this potentially is a problem.
It would only be a once-off adjustment to the ratio, so it'll be a once-off adjustment and continue like that. So there's not going to be a benefit specifically for us. So from my perspective, it wouldn't necessarily make any sense to increase it to 10 million.
Can you just say again?
We'd only get a once-off benefit in terms of changing that restriction or the 10 million working capital in terms of that particular ratio, and it'll just be staying constant. So there's no real benefit in changing it outside of that one-off benefit.
But there's no funds to create it either.
Well, yeah. So if you've got an additional $5 million lying around somewhere, we can happily add it in, but at this
Well, I think the community would much rather see it invested in works and services in the Shire. But anyhow, look, I just seem to think if at the next meeting it can be raised, because, you know, the way you read these minutes, the committee thinks that it should be increased to 10 million, but as the director said, that was potentially one person's view. So I'll just raise it because some could misuse that figure if they want to do mischievous. In relation to the Audit Risk and Improvement Committee, and I think the committee is getting through an enormous amount of work, and it's great to have this audit overview, independent of the council laws and the mayor, who aren't on the committee. I think it's excellent. It makes for good reading. In relation to item 9.13, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 141 of the business paper and declare that carried. Next item is item 9.4, the community reference panels. I have had a word to some of the staff about these minutes and consistency in the minutes, and I think that's going to be addressed. So I'm just happy to move the officer's recommendation. There was quite a few apologies from the reference committee for community, so maybe you've got to look at the timing of that meeting too, but that's really a matter for the staff in consultation with the panel members. I would move in relation to item 9.14, the committee reference panel, the recommendation as outlined on page 164 of the business paper, 1, 2 and 3, and declare that carried. Is there any other business, General Manager?
Yes, there is, Mr. May. As you'd be aware, we have recently completed our restructure of the organisation, and as part of that restructure, we have created a new role, a manager, community life and libraries. And this is in recognition of the importance of community to the organisation and the relationship and working with the community. I'm pleased to announce, after a competitive process, we have appointed Catherine Badgett-Juleff as the manager, Community Life Libraries, and Catherine's here this afternoon, and look forward to her joining the leadership team and contributing to the Shire. So, thank you, Mr. May.
Thank you. Welcome to Wingecarribee. And the importance of community to this council is very, very high. Declare the meeting closed, and thanks for your attendance.